Hi there, Dr. Elissa Farrow. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Marcus. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for joining us. It's really, really good. I appreciate it. Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that so many of you generous folk are just giving us time for this Futures 101 course. So many thanks. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. You're a futurist, or this is the sort of job that you play with, and I know you do other things. Can you kind of lay out your portfolio of life and tell us how you got here? So I know you started in government, but yeah, can you fill us in, please, on how you are right here now with me, and why am I interviewing you anyway?
Yeah, wow. Well, good starting question,
Yeah.
Marcus. And my entry into futures happened a number of years ago, where I was at the time working for the Queensland state government, and I had the opportunity to attend a leadership workshop that Professor Sahel Anatullah was facilitating for us as part of, I think it was called the Executive Challenge Academy at the time,
Yes.
Jan Archer's
Yeah.
beautiful curated process that's still happening. And that was the sort of beginning few seeds that sort of were planted. But for me, I was always a long-term thinker, always a strategist, originally a social scientist, where I started my career working in the non-profit sector, working in domestic and family violence prevention. So even that sort of work was all about looking forward to positive futures, hopefully non-violent futures. And so that introduced to some of these futures tools in a process, in particular, some of the six elements of the six pillars always sort of resonated with me. I also had wanted for ages, ever since I did a master's degree back in the 90s, which shows how youthful I am, that I thought, what am I going to study? What am I going to look at? And I came to the topic that I was deeply entrenched in, working in the field of organizational change management. And I thought the context of artificial intelligence and the rise of AI would be something quite fascinating to use as a muse, but I want to set it all in a longer term context. And so I spoke to my friend, Dr. Jeannie Hoffman, who alerted me to the fact that Sahel and another doctor, Dr. Colin Rosso, were running a futures workshop. And I attended and I floated my doctoral thesis idea past Sahel. And he said, yeah, great idea. Go and talk to my friend Marcus Bussey about potentially connecting to the Sunshine Coast University. And
Yeah.
so for the 4 years, I immersed myself in using a range of different futures tools, looking at organizations of the future. And now it's part of me.
It has. It has. And the journey was really, really elegantly constructed, the way you designed your PhD process and everything. Um, so, in a sense, we know where you're at and you're still in it and you're passionately in it because you're organising this Oceania Futures and Foresight Symposium
Mm.
and you're working at, I would say, kind of helping to create a community sort of sense of futurists so that so all of that's happening. So this is what I think this maybe is your social science type background and your social commitment sort of stuff coming through. Can you speak to that a little bit more, Alyssa, please?
Yeah. I've always been a volunteer. Like even when I was like a teenager, and probably even a child before that, like, oh, I'll do that, miss, in school, and I volunteered in youth work originally. And I was talking to a number of people, including my good friend Jeannie, who I've mentioned, and yourself, Marcus, about the fact that as a futurist who just finished my doctorate, I'd met a range of really awesome people at conferences that I was able to attend, which was wonderful, including one year where I went to three different conferences and used it to sort of gather data for my thesis. And would come across these sort of random people who lived in Australia or New Zealand in broader Oceania, and I thought, there's nothing really gathering us all together here. And I told Jeannie my theory, and I was saying I have the energy to do something in this space, because I believe that in these times of complexity that we're living in, that community is critical. And it's not just the community necessarily in a virtual way, even though international communities are brilliant, but the fact that let's try to get people together in more of a warm way,
Yep.
Nora Bateson's warm data.
Yep.
Let's get together and let's try to host a grassroots from the community for the community symposium, which is happening on the 3rd and 4th of April this year,
Yep.
2025, if someone's
Terrific.
watching this in the future.
That's right. So come along, everybody, if you can. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really running on
definitely.
the smell of an oily rag, so the attendance is not very expensive either, which is all for the good.
It
And
is. It is for the good, and I think that's what futurists can, because we're all different. Everyone is so
yeah,
different in the futures field that I've met, and some people love this sort of more individual sort of ruminations and deep work, and others like myself as an extroverted person love like collaborating. Let's get stuff together, and yeah, I'll have a go at that poetry sort of contribution for that book, Marcus, or I'll have a go
yeah,
at this because it's part of my learning, but also part of my ability to expand mine and hopefully a few other people's horizons as I go.
yeah, no, that's right. And obliquely, Alyssa's referring to the Haiku Horizons paper which she wrote, which will accompany this recording, this interview.
Mm,
And it was terrific. And the arts, creativity, poetry, they're all very, very important because they're all part of this expanded futures consciousness. And as you deal with people, and I guess a lot of it must be presumably fear, but maybe also excitement and anticipation about AI. What
mm.
comes up in that space for you when you're working in those sorts of spaces, Alyssa?
Oh, well, a lot of different thoughts and feelings, and one of the areas I really wanted to explore as part of my thesis was in relation to the mindset that people hold. What would be the implication on their ability to see the future, feel okay in moving towards possible
Mm-hmm.
futures,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me is something that from an AI context that at the time I did my research when it started in 2017 and now in 2025 AI is like everywhere and it sort of exploded with ChatGPT as a really easy interface that even your 6-year-old could do their grade 1 assignment in if they were that way inclined, hopefully not. But yeah, it's fascinating because people are excited about the future. They're fearful about the future, and people that I've been speaking to sometimes just want to be like blinkered, the three monkeys, the
Don't tell me,
blinkered
don't tell
from
me.
the future. When instead, actually,
Yeah,
even being able to sort of talk about what the scenarios are and the fact that there are, outliers, but there's also the ability to make decisions on the possible or even the more positive realm is something that I try to be provocative with people on, especially if I'm talking in conferences and
yeah.
providing keynotes and workshops in fields that aren't futures. So I often like to bridge my world. So a lot of worlds in project and change management and corporate business world and futures world, and try to bridge
Yeah.
topics across them and try to see that the world from different perspectives.
I think that's absolutely key, actually, is that bridge building is what I call it in one of my papers.
Mm,
And this has come up in some of the other interviews that I've had for this course as well. That so bridging is powerful because futurists on their own actually. What are we doing? We're just navel gazing or doing something. But unless we're talking to people who have a foot in the real world or skin in the game, whatever we might call it, and I like that metaphor to have skin in the game,
mm,
that's where any kind of thought, and this is very philosophical, but any kind of thought only gets traction when you see what are the implications of this.
yes,
So
yes,
chasing implications, and then that's when you need the knowledge of telecommunications experts or whatever, whoever they might be,
yeah,
because then they can actually say, this is the way we can see it playing out. And that to me is powerful, Elissa. You're really lucky to
Yeah.
be able to do that sort of work.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can you give us a story, a little story, a vignette from that? Can you do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, certainly. One of the really awesome uh, pieces of work that I had last year was with a client of mine who'd been a long-term, I've been a strategist and a change partner for them for close to 10 years now.
Mm,
And they're in the disability advocacy space, so systemic advocacy, and they do incredible work. Their name's Queenslanders with Disability Network, and awesome, awesome work. And I got to co-design a stakeholder engagement strategy for the Queensland government with QDN stakeholders and members who many who had disabilities. And for that process to happen, we had to look forward into the future about what the reforms that are happening in the disability field in Australia could be, and then be able to work through what would be a important person-centered approach to stakeholder engagement that moves away from the doing to us type of
okay.
metaphor
Yeah.
and to the doing with us. And QDN's motto is nothing about us without us. And I love that frame. And for me, when I'm thinking
Yeah.
about future making, I always make sure I encourage a very diverse range of thoughts and perspectives around the table,
Yeah.
even in organizations that say, well, let's not just take the executive team, let's try to do a cross section, or let's try to have other ways that people can contribute their thoughts, even if the executive team are making the final decisions on
Mm,
the first few steps towards those longer term
yeah.
horizons that they might be looking at. Mm.
Right.
So that's one
Right.
great example, but it was very much highly participatory, which I love. I'm very much a qualitative, highly action-focused, participatory type of style researcher
Yeah.
and person, and also the opportunity to meet government requirements, but also to make sure that we held true to the principles, the values, and the heart of what QDN and their thousands of members across Queensland are really wanting.
Mm.
Mm.
Well, that's inspiring. Yeah, I think that, and this is something that's sort of an advice for people who are exploring this course, is to collect these stories, case studies, to affirm, validate, and also we learn from them. You know, we don't get things right as futurists necessarily at all. Sometimes, and I know I've experienced occasions where everybody in the room thinks that you've just asked the most ugly question possible. You become a pariah almost like that, and and that can be obviously tough on us, but it's also it means that that bridge building work didn't start properly. You didn't get the
Mm.
foundation. Or whoever it is didn't get those foundations right, and how do you therefore enter into the world of your clients so that you start from there and you start building bridges to their preferred futures, right?
Mm.
Is there any advice you could give us on that sort of thing, Elissa?
One of my main tactics is to acknowledge and start from where the client is actually at today. And then what I also do, especially with my change strategist hat on, is do what I call it a legacy assessment. That's not a formal
Yeah.
futures tool, but a legacy assessment that also looks at, well, how have things sort of handled historically in this particular organization around when transformation, has it been successful? Has it been a major stuff up? Is the change management words or even the strategy words sort of seen
Mm.
as a bit of a like, oh, let's get away from that process?
Yeah.
So I always start with where the
Yeah.
person, the group, the organization is actually at. And in particular, look at the context that they're operating in as well, which could be subject to all sorts of forces that they may not have any
Yeah.
control in relation to. So that's the first sort of part of acknowledging the fact that they aren't broken, that there's the ability to always shift and lift, but it takes commitment, time, the right cadence of change making, and to always have a clear image or images of the futures that this organization is looking for. It may not be at the macro level, like
Yeah.
it might need to be broken down into, well, what would this vision of the future look like from the perspective of our customer? What would the vision of the future and our image be from the perspective of a shareholder if it's a
Yeah.
listed company?
Yeah.
And then once we've sort of got those images, let's try to find an integrated one that we
Yeah.
can then start working our way towards. Um, Depends a bit on the need of the client as well, because if some clients come to me and say we just need this to change immediately, but I'll still do that process of acknowledging and appreciating the fact that this is where we are now.
Mm.
The legacy is sometimes no one's fault in particular, but a reason of many different weird decisions that have made where people haven't actually had a long-term futures perspective. And
Yeah.
that if we did have that target operating model of the future or a future view, it could then shape every single decision that we make right now,
Yeah.
could have a positive or negative effect on achieving.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a really cool process, and of course, I don't do that on my own. I do it with as many diverse stakeholders from the organisation
Yeah.
as I can, and if
Absolutely.
there's allowable room, also people who can speak on behalf of customers. If we can't get access to the customers themselves, which is
Mm.
the case sometimes.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's really cool. Yeah. I've done timeline work where the people, this business started in 1965. It was
Oh,
founded by Fred Bloggs or whatever,
mm,
and he died in 1985, and his son took over, and he was an absolute loser, and and nearly bankrupted everybody. And
mm,
he left, and suddenly we solidify. So, and they have all these marks, and then and that's the sort of legacy kind of thing, and so you have people, situations, contexts all mapped out, kind of
mm.
like yeah, and that means that if there are elephants in the room, they often start making noises, so that you can actually identify from, let's say, the wounds that often occur in
Yeah,
institutions, that they
yeah,
get honoured and recognised, as well as its achievements and victories. I
yes,
think that's really
yeah.
that. So it's both. So it's a very balanced kind of stock take on how did we get here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, also having at various points in my life studied grief and loss work for
Yeah.
people, but in the context that I typically work in, which is sort of more organizational context, either non-profit, government, or private sector, sort of commercial context,
Yeah.
it's sometimes just realizing that a change is a grieving process. It can be a need to sort of go through that process of honouring and doing formalised. As William Bridges, a change strategist, says, it's about the making sure that we have appropriate sort of endings. We have this sort of uncomfortable middle stage, which is not so fun, where we're just trying to still grab bits of structure, but then there's new beginnings, and the new beginnings is when we have a plan and a part to play, and we can see how things are actually moving through. So for me, organizational change is never about, well, let's focus on the future and the benefits. It's also about saying, well, this is where we're up to. Let's not erode the things that are really critical to our
Yeah.
core heart of the business. Let's take the things we would like to take on forward into our futures, and the things that maybe we say we don't need that anymore. It's a used future. Let's bless it and let it go in whatever way
Yeah.
we need to.
Yeah.
Maybe not a
Um,
fire or
no,
something,
but
but
you're mentioning
a
fire's
blessing.
funny because you and I, with a bunch of others, have we worked on this ritual,
Ah, yes, yes,
and so
yes. Regen.
having ritual is, even if it's formalized ritual through a series of seminars and stuff that you're doing, because for people from, let's say, industry to come and do a futures focused seminar, it is almost a ritual in itself. Somehow, I think we do need to ritualize transition, because it also
Yeah.
allows space for trauma and grief, doesn't it? And
Yes,
letting
yes, it
go,
does.
and it
Yeah.
opens up new forms of relationality, you might say, with pasts, presents, and futures, because they all fold. And I think
Yes.
ritual is a magic space for that.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's funny because like sometimes people don't want to use like, they'll say, oh, let's just have a morning tea. And remember, cheers to Jono who's left the business. And but it's more than that. And I think I'm working with a client of mine at the moment in a university setting. They're going through a major sort of faculty sort of merger process. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of need to sort of for people to sort of acknowledge the fact that this is a major shift for this particular university, from having had very sort of firm faculty lines for a really
yeah,
long time, and the fact that people are finding ideologically, even their sense of place, their sense of wanting to be part of the future when it is combined, is proving to be
yeah.
quite the process for people.
Yeah, having
Yeah.
universities where that's happened, I know how
Well, it's
much
happening everywhere, isn't it? Across
disaster.
universities
I
at the
mean, it
moment.
can
But
be very messy.
yeah, it can be
Yeah,
messy. But for me, it's about keeping a principle-led approach and keeping an eye always on the end state picture that we're hoping for, and then having agreed ways of dealing with sort of challenge, conflict, concern,
yep,
worry, so that people feel supported and can speak up if they have a different way of seeing things.
yep. Good. I like that, Alyssa.
Hmm.
So we need to bring this to a close. What about advice? What would you say to? We've got all these people interested and curious in futures. Some want to do a PhD. Some just want to have a listen. Some are just thinking about how might this fit into my career as a in my broader career. Like we've got some educators, people studying to be teachers. What's your sort of take on all of this, and what advice would you have?
I think in terms of the take, it's awesome that all of you, I'll speak to the broader audience, all of you are doing this Futures 101 series with Marcus. Um, the first thing that I'd say is to realize that futures is not just one field. There's like 70 or maybe more years of legacy thought, leadership theories, readers' advice. The World Future Studies Federation, I think it was their 50th
Oh, a
anniversary.
couple of years ago, yeah.
So
Wow.
it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
So even though it's got a bit of a hype at the moment, like I see a lot of people, oh, the futurist said this, etc. But just be um in real the fact that there's incredible ranges of models that have over time built on each other. But look at some of the early foundational pieces. But also realize that because it is like a continuum where some are more deeply sort of philosophical, and even the
Yeah.
futures process is about deep thinking and shifting perspectives, while other ends, which is the end that I love, is like building on that. But then what are we going to do to action the future? To just be playful with it. There's games that people use, art that people use,
Yeah.
creative process, talk with one another. Don't sort of just sit there and think, oh, well, I've got to think of the future myself. No, the best way to do it is together, with others as a community, make it fun, have cups of tea or
Yes.
something stronger if you're that way inclined, and realize that the more we can get people to think about the future, the more we can actually create the futures that we're looking for.
Beautiful.
And for me, I'm all about making sure that everything that I do, even if it's by stealth, futures, it's sort of undercurrent of futures as opposed to overt, like this is a futures process, is about creating positive futures that are good for the people and the planet is my main core value. And why I want to provoke and change and challenge decision makers to say you don't have to just do what everyone else is doing. If there's a different path that's
Yeah.
actually going to be better for the world, for your community, for your customers, why don't we think about that? Economic drivers don't have to be the central value proposition. It's about us, people, planet, animal,
Us.
spirit. There you
Yes.
go. Full stop.
That's fabulous. And this idea of provoking. And yesterday I was giving a different talk to a bunch of master students in Sweden, and I coined the word. We don't just have to be provocateurs. We also need to be evocateurs. to
Mm.
evoke, to call forth, to summon
Yes,
into the
beautiful. Love
room
that.
the spirit of the future or the ghosts, because I also work with ghosts, and ghosts are really very helpful. They'll come and sort of look at me. The ghost of a child not yet born yet will look at me in the eye, and that from 20 to 2200, let's say, and I'll say,
Yeah.
Marcus, what are you up to? Why are you doing that? You realize that us kids, 7 generations
Yeah.
hence, and you go, okay. So yeah, I love that, Elissa. I think it's a really great summary. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. Great to be part of this with you.
Yeah, it's all cool. It's happening. Okay.
Woohoo!
More soon. Bye bye.